Hello, everybody out there in internet land. This is Ginger, and we are back with another episode of Fighting the Void. Today, I am joined by my friend Jake Wilson, whom I also work with on some other things that are currently going to be secret, but will be becoming public relatively soon. So with that completely ambiguous teaser, I'm going to go ahead and intro the topic for today. We're discussing something that Jake actually introduced me to recently. It's called the Replicability Crisis, and it's a problem in the sciences, especially from what I can tell, mostly the social sciences, but also in the medical field as well, where many studies, many results can't be duplicated. For anyone who knows anything about science, that's kind of an issue. If your findings can't be duplicated, it calls your findings into some rather serious question. So, Jake, first of all, can you explain it a little bit more in depth for the audience? And also, I'm kind of curious how you found out about this in the first place.
Well, I'm obviously not a scientist, so I'll set that out right away. So
Why do you say obviously?
I'm obviously not a scientist, because I work in the Navy as a nuclear electronics technician. So, but I have an interest in it, obviously.
So you're a Navy nuke. Obviously, you're interested in the sciences to some degree.
Right. I'm interested in science to at least a little bit. Let's see. How did I become aware of this? I guess it kind of like 2 or 3 years ago, I was, just reading through some different stuff on websites. Usually it was like political commentators, right. and they, would something mention, would mention it or talk about it. And then, so I ended up kind of just doing a deeper dive on it, mm-hmm. and found that like this was actually a pretty serious issue. Mm-hmm. Like there's some I like to use the term science whenever I talk about it in a modern sense, because it seems like it's more people have lent science really just become more of a religion.
Right. Has our white lab coated priests.
Right. Yeah. And that's really kind of an accurate description. And in today's world, we've replaced a lot of the God in the popular culture with this science. There's like there's Facebook pages like I effing love science and stuff like that. And they do kind of pop things that really aren't science, but the whole point is that people kind of have this tendency to I guess, I kind of hearken it back to like feudal Europe with the Catholic Church. If the priest says something that I'm not, the priest said something, well, of course they're going to take it as, the truth, because he's the guy, he's the authority with the as far as that, as far as that stuff goes. So we're going to believe it. So when I see this study come out that, this and this happened, or this is the case, then, you automatically want to be like, oh, well, that's cool. And, you use that. Well, turns out that if you look at it closely, a coin flip is more accurate whether or not that's going to be true. And, as far as the origins of the replicability crisis, I don't know if you want me to get into that.
Please do.
Well, but so it came about like 8 or 9 years ago, and I think 2011, when it was a pharmaceutical company. I can't remember the name. It was a name, a name people recognize, but
Bayer,
yeah, I think it was Bayer. Yeah, you're right. I think it was Bayer. I think Bayer was failing all these clinical trials, and they're like, well, what's going on? Why are we failing these clinical trials? Well, they did it. They looked into it, and they found that the trials they were basing the papers that they were basing off these trials turned out to be unable to be verified.
That's a problem.
Yeah, so that's a problem, and so that kind of snowballed into the medical field, and then the And then of course the psychological field, as you mentioned, was really hit hard by it, which, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense that that's going to be one of those.
Yeah, honestly, that didn't surprise me, especially when I first saw, when that was the first stuff that came up, was that the replicability crisis was hitting the social sciences really hard. I'm like, well, I got thinking about it. I'm like, well, duh. Isn't the real problem that anyone would treat the social sciences like the hard sciences in the first place?
Right.
And that isn't even, it sounds like I'm being explicitly derogatory to the social sciences, and I'm really not, because they need to be, to treat them correctly, you need to kind of understand them and put them in the proper place. And the fact is, they're not a hard empirical science. It's not like physics or chemistry or anything like that. You're dealing with people. You're dealing with their minds. You're dealing a lot with how they're feeling on a given day. Your results might change depending on the amount of information a person has from one day to the next. Or whatever they experienced last week. If you're doing a social study on the effects of crime in a neighborhood, you may sample the same people 1 week, and then like 5 years later, someone tries to replicate your study and samples the exact same people, but maybe they got mugged in the meantime and their ideas have changed a little bit. You're dealing with people. It's not going to be an exact science. So the very notion that you would have strictly replicable results in the social sciences in the first place that's, to me, at least as big a problem as any replicability crisis in that corner of the scientific world.
Right. And I think that really kind of, has it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And this problem would be easily dismissible were it not for the fact that the medical medical science industry started the whole thing, right? They were the first things who were like, what's going on here?
Right.
And there's, if you really look into it, there's other problems, that other disciplines of science that aren't hit as hard but still have some effects of the people.
And there's always going to be you're always going to have studies, experiments and stuff that just for whatever reason you can't replicate, either because there was or either because there was a fraud on one end or the other, or you got that 1 in a million result, or you got a result you didn't understand and claimed it was one thing when really it was something completely different. The one thing that comes to mind, the first big, non-replicable thing that I remember in my lifetime was the whole cold fusion thing.
Right.
Basically, for those who don't remember, and I'm going off my memory here, Jake can correct me if he remembers better, was a couple of guys basically found some way where in a bottle at room temperature, you could fuse like deuterium and something else. I think it was another element you find frequently in water. And basically, that's just fusing deuterium. And fusion, of course, as anybody knows anything about nuclear power, is a much more powerful reaction than fission, which is what powers your nuclear bombs and every nuclear reactor currently on the planet. Nuclear fusion is what powers stars. And there's a lot of benefits other than the increased energy that you get from it. It's also inherently safer. The waste is much less radioactive, lasts a lot less time and everything. And as such, people have been chasing fusion for longer than I've been alive. It hasn't worked out so well. So the fact that these guys were suddenly saying, hey, we figured out a way to do this at room temperature, a lot of people were very excited about this. I remember reading articles about it in my local newspaper when I was a kid. I was like, whoa, this is awesome. Right. Yes, I was reading about cold fusion in the newspaper when I was a kid. Screw you, I'm a nerd. Deal with it. All right?
Right.
You have a problem with it, I'll fight you. Okay. And so, but of course, that all fizzled out because people couldn't replicate the results.
Right. And the problem, I think that the problem that I think that the replicability crisis has really highlighted is the methodology of the way the scientific community operates and the problems with that, right? So the big problem is that if you, no matter what kind of work you're doing, if you're not published as a scientist in one of the 3 major journals, then you ain't nothing.
Right.
So, and you're not going to get any notice and you're not going to get any funding, right?
You're chasing power, money, and prestige. Same as anybody in any profession.
Which is inevitable for the human condition, obviously.
Yes. Yeah.
But but the way it has developed has led to the massive ability to defraud basically the public, because we're not necessarily, everybody's not either doesn't have the time, doesn't have the really cognitive capability to understand
not the time, not the energy, not the background,
right? But anybody can read a scientific paper and look at it and be like, okay, or come to an understanding of the results. But and so we expect that in these papers, these papers are going to be legitimate. Well, if they're not, which there was one of the studies that I read on the replicability crisis did a really good job of like breaking down of how they said that the error alpha, which is the percentage of expected error in a published paper in a journal, I guess the expected percentage of error, erroneous papers in a journal is under 5%.
Yeah.
And how basically if you math it out, it's actually more like 35% is the real alpha, the real effective alpha that you can assume. So and the way the methodology, and if you're a guy, you doing your science thing, right? And you publish a paper, and you submit it to review, peer review or otherwise, and people are looking at it and going into a journal, or, you're looking at, and then the people running the journal are looking at it, and somebody's peer reviewing it. If they give you a bad peer review, what are the chances of a peer review that's going to be done by you for them in the future is going to be bad, right? You're like human nature, right? You're gonna want to. So
you didn't like my paper, so I don't like yours.
Right. So what happens is we get this. Well, I don't want him to say anything about me, because if he says something bad about me, then I'm not going to get in this prestigious journal, and I'm not going to get any eyeballs on my paper, and nobody's going to give me any funding to do the more research that I want to do. Well, turns out, so that just leads further to a culture of this idea that this idea that we're just gonna be a closed community of scientists, and we're gonna reinforce we're gonna reinforce each other, and we're not gonna nobody's gonna rock the boat, and we're all gonna get lots of government funding and grants from companies to perform all this research that we're doing. Well, great for your pocketbook and for your research, but not so much for everybody else who's looking at these things and trying to use them and expecting these things to be accurate and worthwhile, when
especially since especially when looking at social sciences, people look at these studies as grounds for setting public policy,
right? Yes.
How many times do you get in an argument on the internet about this or that public policy, whether it's about gun control, abortion, pick anything really, environmental studies, and somebody whips out a thing. Well, this study says. It's like, well, that study says this, but this study over here says that. And, if we're both essentially taking it as gospel truth, that's not, especially if you're looking at just these studies, especially if it's just one study that happens and looking to base your whole public policy off of one or two studies, you're not really being very smart. But the problem is people do it, and people do it again, because as I said kind of at the beginning, people treat the social sciences as like the hard sciences.
Right.
And, the hard sciences, honestly, experiments are hard enough to replicate there. Right. There's any number of variables and stuff that you have to account for, that you have to adjust for, that, you're using different equipment. There's different people looking at it, freaking different time of the year. Who knows? There's all kinds of variables. We don't understand the physical world nearly as much as we'd like to think we do. Right. Now, you take that and put it into the social realm again with people involved. Are you freaking kidding me? These
right.
Things, and that's not to say that they might not be pointing towards something that generally, broadly speaking, might be true, or at least true in certain instances. That's not to say that these studies don't necessarily have value. But if you're building the whole thing off just one thing that you haven't even looked at with a critical eye yourself, you are going about this all wrong. You are, in fact, expressing blind faith in these studies.
Right. And I think that that's a big problem with the social science, and why it's so important that people understand this, especially about the social sciences, is number one, like you said, because they treat it like hard science. Hard sciences. They treat it like, I take my glasses case and I drop it and to test gravity, and then they treat it like that, and it's not right.
Exactly. If you treat it like the gospel truth, literally.
Right. And when it comes to that, like, it's really interesting, because I see it too. It's like people even allow that to override common sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, humans have been living together for thousands of years. Right. So, we kind of have an intuitive understanding of the way we interact, and from the way we interact, and how things we say are going to be taken by some people, various social and sexual hierarchies that occur, and so we kind of have an intuitive understanding, if not a what's the other term?
No, it's not a science. It's not a scientific understanding.
Right. It's not a scientific understanding. Yeah. So people are allowing that to override their common sense and the stuff that they already know to be true. Right. Like, for example, like the basic concept with socialism. Right.
Right.
We all know that the whole, from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs, right. Marx, and and that kind of sounds like, well, okay, then everybody gets what they needs, but
sounds great, right?
Yeah, but everybody knows, like, at the time Marx wrote it, everybody understood that people do things for incentives.
Yep.
People don't like, as wishfully as much as we wish that people would just be, benevolent and do things for all, for all the right reasons all the time. We know that people do stuff for incentives. So, if you take away the incentives, you're going to have a bad result.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like people shut down what they know, and they say, oh, well, this person says in this specific instance of this trial that he did this, that that this works. And
Yep.
it's like, well, but that doesn't make any sense. Then when you're the person who, the problem in the situation we have is when you're the person that pipes up and says, well, the emperor doesn't have any clothes on in this particular instance, right? Then you get shouted down.
Right. You're the idiot.
Yeah, you're the idiot. You're the the science denier.
Yeah.
and so it's really difficult to win in this thing, and it's a lot of it is because of the situation that we have with, like you were saying, with the white coated priests and the treating of science as a religion.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get into like another very easily, actually, and I'm gonna get flack if anybody watches this video and comes at it, but is evolution. Evolution is extremely easily countered as an argument, as a principle, and as an argument. But people just don't, because they believe it and they want it to be true.
There's truth. I've actually looked into that myself fairly a little bit here and there. I read a book a while ago defending the basic concept of Darwinian evolution, because a lot of people don't know this. The Catholic Church actually has doesn't have any problem with it on its face. In fact, one of the earliest people to suggest the basic notion of evolution was actually St. Augustine way back in the 4th century. So keep, that's something that's a factoid I like to keep in my back pocket for people like, you just don't like science because you're religious. Oh yeah, bam.
Well, and that kind of pulls brings me in another thing that I think is worth addressing in this conversation is that a lot of problems with the science is when they're unmoored, when it's because a lot of the early science, especially because you get once you have the late Roman Empire, and then into the feudal times, and then into the Renaissance, a lot of the science was sponsored by the Catholic Church.
Yeah,
yeah.
I could probably do a series of episodes just on the contributions of various Catholics to various sciences.
Well, yeah,
seismology, for example, was invented by Jesuits.
Right.
One off the top of my head. There's
right.
more.
and you get this topsy-turvy, upside down view spin on things where it's like people think, oh, the Catholic Church was anti-science because they killed Galileo, when it's like, well, they actually didn't kill Galileo.
No, he was under house arrest for being a jerk.
Yeah, and he was he was a big jerk.
Yeah.
And so it's like they didn't actually.
Yeah. I'm not saying he could have been under house arrest either. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
We didn't burn him at the stake. That was Giordano Bruno that you're thinking of, actually.
Right.
And he was primarily burned at the stake for being an occultist. Again, I'm not saying that was your thing, but get your historical facts straight, people.
Right. And so this idea that there's some, there's some opposition between church, religion and science is just crap. When
it's an Enlightenment invention that unfortunately too many religious people have bought into, and that was actually something just to work our way back on track here. In the introduction to that book, I'm talking about Finding Darwin's God by Kenneth Miller. He's actually a fellow Catholic, and he actually said it's like part of the problem here is too many scientists have been willing to use evolution as a club against religion.
Right.
He's like scientists have got a lot of the blame here for why there's so much contention around this particular issue. That said, I also just got done recently listening to a book by Stephen Meyer, Darwin's Doubt, which is about all the issues with the concept, with the basic concept of Darwinian evolution brought up by the Cambrian explosion, which, for those who don't know, is essentially this really should be part of a whole nother episode.
Right.
The Cambrian explosion is essentially when we first see all of the basic animal forms that we know and love today. We basically went from bacteria to all the basic body plans that you see today. The forms and everything, the way they appear has changed a lot, but the basic structures and everything came in place during the Cambrian explosion and haven't changed drastically since. And
Right.
that's something that Darwin himself, in Origin of Species, looked at and said, this could be a potential problem for my theory, but I'm pretty sure they'll find the fossil record to support it and explain away the Cambrian explosion. Has never happened, despite many attempts to do so.
Yeah.
So that in and of itself is a bit of a bit of a hitch in the giddy up.
Well, to kind of come again, the biologists, unfortunately, are actually the out of the the academic science community. They're now, like, take this in the context of what I'm saying, but they're the least intelligent, and like if you actually game it out, I've seen articles and stuff to this effect, but they're the least intelligent, and they have less of an understanding of other disciplines that relate to their discipline, like statistics.
That's interesting.
So like when it comes to bring it back to kind of the function and the working of science and how it can be wrong, it's the if you don't understand like the rate of and I'm getting into kind of an esoteric explanation a little bit, sorry, but if you understand the rate of speciation that is required for evolution to take place, we've seen no evidence that is the case. That supports the rate of mutations in the genomes to get from what we think was in the past to what we have now.
Right. And
if
essentially there's not nearly, despite having a 4.5 billion year old planet, there's still not enough time to have enough successful mutations to get from point A to point B.
Right.
And that's the key right there. The key is successful mutations, and one stacked up on top of another.
And we've never seen a new species. We've never seen a new, like you were saying before, we've never seen a new species. So
no, we've seen rapid changes depending on the environment. We have seen
the moth example in England, the Industrial Revolution. England is a great example of kind of changes that we see. But
there was another one in Miller's book. It had to do with some sort of fish change the environment a little bit, and they actually did change, in a fairly significant amount, but it wasn't a whole new species by any means. It's a new version of this particular kind of fish. Is all. It's like, a golden lab and a black lab, essentially.
Right. Yeah. And they do stuff with like fruit flies too. I've heard of the experiments they've done with fruit flies, and they've never been able to make a fruit fly not a fruit fly. They've made fruit flies without wings, fruit flies with like legs, leg growing out of its head or whatever it was.
I heard about and I think there was another one with like 4 wings.
Right, 4 wings, but they've never made a fruit fly. They've never started with a fruit fly and then got something completely different.
Well, and even like with the one with 4 wings, you would think that it's like, hey, that's a potential useful thing. Problem is, you got the wings, but you didn't get the support structure. It needs infrastructure. You didn't get the infrastructure to go along with it to make it useful.
Right, and it talks about where you're allowing your common sense to be overridden by what some scientists in a paper, in an esoteric paper, wrote down. Whereas, like you think, oh, well, in evolution, in developing an arm, right? So for centuries, I'm going to just have a useless nub that doesn't do anything, that has to grow into an arm.
It is more or less the theory.
Right. Well, how am I going to get any use out of that? And how is that going to be any advantage? And how's that going to improve my mating prospects at all when I'm going to be essentially deformed when my lineage is going to be deformed for centuries?
Well,
So
and that's one of the things that is worth pointing out about that. And then actually we should get back to the actual replicability crisis. It'll leave this tangent aside. Is they always kind of show how like a fin, like the bone structure in the fin of a whale, for example, looks a lot like the bone structure of a hand.
Right.
This is very true. I don't think anyone's denoting this, and that's a potential clue that we're genetically related somehow. Okay, sure. But, however, again, how do you get from one to the other? And also, how do you get there from just like, say, one particular whale having that particular mutation? Because it's not like this particular mutation necessarily shows up in a massive amount of, like, say, the whale species, and then leads to a mutation that gets you to something closer and closer and closer and closer and closer to a land-based mammal that has it's got to follow in a line, because it isn't just one mutation happening at once in all members of a species,
right,
or even in a massive number of species. It's one mutation happening one time in one particular member of a species that then somehow has to be propagated
right,
throughout the entire species. Now, you do get mutations that do propagate.
yes,
that does happen. There you go.
right.
So it certainly does happen. Does it happen and build on itself enough to where you get to a whole new species? Not necessarily. And besides, this is in fact part of the interbreeding between Cro-Magnon and Neanderthals. So, right. It's not even like a new. It's not even like a new thing. It's actually just an old thing that's just hung around.
Right. It is really, it's pretty fascinating. I think that, but yeah, to come back to the replicability crisis, like, like the again, it's all about the not allowing your common sense to be overridden by your by what some person with
what you saw on a paper.
By what you saw on a paper,
oh, that looks smart.
And I'm not, and we're not trying to, like, and I think that it always, because whenever you attack science nowadays, and people take, like, just like religion, they take it as an attack on their faith, right? So
right.
they get all harebrained about it, and if you just think about, if you allow yourself to think about it and use your common sense and realize that, hey, this person may have some more knowledge, but that doesn't mean that I can't read read their result and be like, that doesn't really make that much sense. So maybe we should look at this more, or maybe I need to see some more verification in this whole process before I really make a decision and say, oh, okay, this is something that's really pretty clear, and we need to make sure we do something about this. Or I was thinking of social science type stuff that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And it's just you can't, science, like any other thing, any other man-made institution, is corruptible and manipulable. Like we saw, it was in the news. Wow, it must have been a year ago or so now, about the group that got in a couple of papers, like a couple of completely fabricated papers, and got them peer reviewed into a journal.
The one about rape culture at dog parks.
Right, rape culture at dog parks. Yeah, and it's just like,
I just love saying that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's pretty hilarious. But yeah, it's just one of those things where you're just you have to realize that these are people too, and just because that somebody says something doesn't mean, somebody says something with more of a I guess in authority, in authority, because
Right.
let's be honest, a scientist who has spent their who spent their academic career studying something, and then it went into that same field, and is an authority. I can agree that they are in authority on the
Right.
topic, but I mean, for uh I get just because you're an authority doesn't mean that everything you say is going to be correct.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, it's just like you're Catholic and I'm a Latter-day Saint, so
Hmm.
I think we have a better understanding of that because we have a centralized authority figure at the head of
Right.
both our church, and we
Hmm.
understand that these people are men in addition to being
Right.
called of God and in a position of authority, of religious authority, right?
Not to be dismissed offhandedly, but also understand we're still dealing with people
Right.
who, maybe you want to be like, you want to look at it a little closer.
Right. And I think, and again, I think it does a good job. That highlights also the fact that, again, it's a large coupling, a large removal of the coupling that religion and science used to have.
Hmm.
Because as a religious person, I find creation fascinating.
Right.
And that's part of, and when I find I find it fascinating, so I want to learn how it works, and or know how it works, or hear about how it works.
Hmm.
And uh and there's no reason for it to be separated. And I think that, again, I think that a problem with the replicability crisis is it's in this age of, sorry, that's not what I want to say. I think that the not the problem, but the reason that we're experiencing this replicability crisis is that we are in an age where so much of what was understood to be truth has become relative now.
Yeah.
And with that relativity, well, there, and I always get into more when I get more into philosophical arguments with people. I
Right.
always there's either an objective morality
Hmm.
or there is no morality. You can't have it in between. There is either none, or it either exists,
Hmm.
or it exists objectively, right?
Hmm.
And if you have something like science that is supposed to be rooted in objective truth, and you don't believe or think that there is an objective truth, I don't understand how somebody can't think that we wouldn't have a
Hmm.
replicability crisis on our hands.
Right. Well, that's very true. That said, in the hard sciences, the vast number of people are theists of some sort. I think it's like 70 something percent of all scientists, and I assume it means hard scientists, are actually theists. It's probably, honestly, mostly the social sciences where you find a lot of atheists.
Right.
To
Yeah.
be perfectly honest,
Yes.
which again, it's exactly what you were just saying.
Right. And they're the
Where do
ones
we have
suffering most from this crisis.
exactly?
Um,
Where do we have most of the replicability crisis? In the social sciences.
yeah.
Now, to talk a little bit about the medical world, because that's much more in the realm of the hard sciences.
I like
Um,
to, just as a sign up before you get on it, I like
yeah.
to refer to, like, I consider medicine
Hmm.
engineering. I don't really consider it in the loose term of science that
That's
people so
fair.
much use, because I kind of go by the philosophy of, once science becomes reliable, we call it engineering. So,
Fair.
but
That's reasonable.
yeah, but anyway, continue with your point.
Well, I mean, I was just going to point out that in the medical field, because I mean, we're still dealing with it in a scientific sense, and the fact that we can measure the effectiveness of a given drug. We can just clearly see using various scientific methods and in tools that engineering has given us, to determine how effective it is in fixing the human body. We can see its effects. Now, but that said, it's also you're also dealing with the primary subject is still the human,
right?
Which means you've got, okay, so how does this particular pill affect people? Well, how many different variables are there that could change inside a given person, as that would affect how any pill is going to give them? You've got any number of variations in brain chemistry. You've got differences in metabolism. You've got what they ate the night before. There's, how much do they exercise? What are certain differences in their genetics? I mean, just look at the two of us. There are various certain differences in our genetics that, depending on, that could affect how we respond to given medication.
Right. And I think also something that I kind of this is just, my personal science, quote unquote, science observations, right? I joined the Navy at 24 years old. So I joined, 6 years
late.
after, 6 years after most. I had 2 kids when I joined the Navy.
You joined at the age that I got out.
Right, exactly. So I kind of had a different perspective. I wasn't, ironically enough, although in my A school class, I was not the oldest man in there. The oldest man was 28, which was really surprising.
That's old for a nuke.
Right, yeah, really old for a nuke. But regardless, so I've had a lot of perspective in a lot of my Navy career. I've been the old man in the division, which is my work group, for those who don't know how the Navy is structured. So I've been the old man, and the Navy, like all the military branches, does a bi-yearly physical examination where you do push-ups, sit-ups, and cardio, right? Well, I've had anywhere from 14 to 14 and a half minutes to run a mile and a half. Most of the time when I'm not in Hawaii, where it's humid and hot and annoying and I hate it, just put it out there, I can do the run in 12 and a half minutes, which is the max passable time for a 20-year-old to do it.
Right. That's pretty much the time that I had to run it in for the most.
Yeah. Right. So it's 12 and a half minutes. Well, me, I beat the majority, and trust me, I don't work out. I just don't work out. I probably should do it more, but I just don't. I, who lives a non-working out lifestyle, I would beat these guys that were 6 to 8 years younger than me, because I had willpower. I had the will to do it. I wasn't in any better shape than them, really. I just had the will to do it. And I think that with medicine, I think a lot of times people kind of ignore the effect of will and what that has, and how much effect that has on actually how your body responds to stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've got well documented, psychosomatic illnesses. Basically, you think you're sick, so you are.
You're right.
That can have an effect. You've got, you got them studying the placebo effect. Somebody hands you a pill and says, "This is going to make you better." There's nothing in it. It's just a sugar pill, essentially. Right. But because they told you it's going to make you better, behold, it does, or at least it has some sort of positive effect.
Yeah,
it may not cure. You may not be cured because you think that pill is going to cure you, but it made you better. Just maybe just a little bit, enough to measure. This is why they have control groups, so that they have control groups in medicine to account for the placebo effect, so that they can say, okay, yeah, you know what, we gave these people the sugar pill, saying it was going to have the same effects as the real thing. But yeah, they might have felt a little bit, but these guys really felt a lot, the ones who got the real thing. So clearly the real thing works, whereas, based on the difference in how the placebo works and how the real thing works. Yes, absolutely. your willpower, what's going on in your brain, in your mind, definitely does affect how things go physically. And so I can really see when you're studying a living subject, the potential for a replicability issue is more likely than it is when you're studying, when you're studying rocks, for example.
Right.
What happens when I drop this big heavy hard rock on the smaller softer rock?
Right.
That's a much easier thing to replicate. You're dealing with completely inanimate objects that are all working on the same playing field, but even then, you're still gonna have potential differences because you can't smash the same rock twice.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think a good example of a non-human science where that I think this will I think this kind of has an effect is, do you remember I think it was about 6 months ago when they made that big deal about the photograph of the black hole?
Oh yeah.
Well, if you think about that, you can't like, if you know anything about that, you can't take a picture of a black hole. It's impossible.
Right. Yeah. Technically,
right?
You can't take a picture of a black hole.
Right. So what they did is they took a lot of data from various points of points. They took a lot of telemetry data, and then they used a computer algorithm to make a picture.
Yeah.
Well, you have a ton in there. You have a ton of ways for a human to insert their bias into that process, right?
Yeah.
So okay. So when I saw it, I was like, well, that's kind of cool, but I'd like to see that done from other, what results from other sources that
right
gets.
Right. Give the same data to another group and see what sort of false image, because it is a false image in the sense that it's not a direct photograph. It's not to say that what they're presenting is false, but it's not an actual photograph. Is all I'm saying.
Well, it's kind of like if you think about it, to give people a better understanding of it. Like if you were to take use sonar to get data from something, and then you were to color in the various differences in what you got.
Yep.
That would be akin to what they did with the black hole.
Right. Yeah. Pretty similar. And it's, does somebody else come up with the same kind of thing that looks like you would expect an accretion disk to look like?
Right.
And honestly, it probably does look fairly similar to that. I don't know that we have any reason to think otherwise, but it's a very good point that there are lots of places for people to insert bias. I mean, there's even every picture anyone's ever seen of Mars. There is, because no human being has ever seen on Mars. We've only ever seen it through the lens of a camera, which has been transmitted back here, used in some sort of digital form.
Right.
It's, and then it has to get reinterpreted back into an image. Most, if not all of those, have been altered in some way to present color, to present contrast.
Right.
And it's, there is legitimate debate as to what the actual color of the sky on Mars is.
Yeah. Right. So
in a sense, we don't actually know. No one's ever been there. Now, I think we've got a pretty good idea. It's, and we've got a pretty good idea of the soil. It's some gradation of reddish, orangish, something for the most part, but we don't know 100% for sure because we haven't been there.
Right. Like, and so I think that kind of, that's a great example of how, we inject our own suppositions just because we want something to be true or think it would be cool to be true doesn't mean that it's actually true. And if it's, and so we can't just, we have to you have to, whenever you look at whenever anyone looks at any type of science, they need to not throw their common sense out the window. They need to take it and be like, these are humans doing a thing, and this is what they say they got.
Mhm.
And does that pass does it pass the BS test, right? Could I consider this plausible based on what I know to be true
Right.
in the world?
Yep.
So.
I was earlier today, I had the spare time, so I was looking up, and I was just looking up different factors that could affect studies that are creating the replicability crisis. And it talked a little bit about how incentives can make you biased. Like, to use a popular example, when before it was obvious public knowledge that nicotine is addictive, tobacco companies would fund studies and stuff, and they say that it's not. Were the scientists necessarily outright lying? Maybe, maybe not. But if you're being paid by a company that wants you to find a certain result, let's face it, you're more likely to give them the result that they want.
Right.
Whether the data supports it or not, or you're likely to interpret the data in the most favorable way possible that leans in the direction of the conclusion you want. And then, you write it up, you overstate your already skewed results. And you've got, oh yeah, sure, nicotine's not that addictive, really. I mean, it's fine.
Big deal.
Lung cancer, whatever. You've got the fact that, like you kind of said, publication is an issue. If you get results that say this isn't a thing, I didn't get the result I wanted, you don't get published.
Right.
People don't get republished for not proving what they wanted to prove.
Right. Yeah, which is it's weird. You would think that would be important in science too.
To me, that would be just as interesting.
Hey, I set out because I thought that I was going to prove this, and it didn't work.
Yep.
And here's why.
Yeah.
And here's why I think. And so that would be, to me, that would be like, oh hey, if I was in the science field and looking at this, I'd be like, oh, hey, maybe I should try my hand at that to see if I get the same results, or if I can't produce this specific result. But I don't know if you looked into this, but I thought it was really funny. Like some of the papers arguing back and forth in the psychology field about whether or not they are, because there's some people who really don't want to admit that there's a problem. I
was seeing some articles that talk about that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, they're really like, and they're like really into saying that they don't have a problem.
Oh, I believe it.
They're like,
is it really just an issue of dramatic change and scientists being empowered? I'm like, okay, if that's the language you're using, I know you're full of crap.
Right. And it was like the one was like, oh, because there's one guy who there's only been, so again, there's only been one study that shows the replicability crisis. It was, I can't remember the authors of the study, but then there was one guy. Then there's another one guy who was like, who did a review of that study with a bunch of good, and they produced a paper that said, well, actually, this guy's full of crap because they didn't do X, Y, and Z, and so it's just like this. It's like this. I find it amusing because it's like, you guys aren't really helping your case.
There's no replicability crisis because I can't replicate the result of your study.
Right. like you're like, I can't, like, but yeah,
it smells not quite right around here.
Yeah, they're just
starting to smell a little bit like a candle you can buy on Goop. Anyway,
right, yeah.
Side reference. Anyway, there's the fact that the peer review system is strained, to say the least. I think, like everybody else, they've probably been hit by a lot of budget issues, cut back on staff. So you've got a couple of guys doing peer reviews, maybe for things that they're not even qualified for.
Right.
And then, like you said, well, if I scratch this guy's back, maybe he'll scratch mine. You've got that kind of thing going on. And then you've got the issue, and again, this is where the social sciences are particularly vulnerable. Do the results of this study fit my narrative or not?
Right.
Again, the same guys that published the dog park rape culture study, they also produced basically a feminist manifesto that was just a feminist rewriting of Mein Kampf.
Right. Yes.
Like, wait, what? You did what? Oh.
Oops.
We'll review this again. Oh, wait, no one who's ever read a book.
Right. Well,
like,
yeah, it's the I had something and now I lost it. Great. But if you nope, I had something and then I lost it. So I lost my train of thought. Dang it.
All right. So at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of reasons why this is going on. Inherent bias, lack of funding, because again, another thing that I read, it's like, getting a large sample size requires time and money, of which there are limited amounts of both. So a lot of times a scientist may want a sample of 5,000 people, but he can only get funding for 200. So he gets 200 funding for 200, gets essentially the 200 closest people that he can to do his study, and that means it's skewed for whatever local culture exists and basically all the different environments. Again, this is a social sciences thing. Whereas somebody else who lives in a completely different area gets different funding, may do a bigger sample size and come up with completely different results.
Right.
Again, nobody's necessarily lying. Nobody's trying to be disingenuous, but you still have an issue.
Right, and I think that there's the similar. I think to circle back a little bit. I did remember what I was going to say. Like for example, the you have things where it's very clear that there's a bias, and there's a bias in all these sciences, because, like, for example, Robert Putnam, the who wrote Bowling Alone, he's the guy who wrote who did the largest ever study on diversity, and how it proved that it's actually not the good thing like they think it is, or like they try to. Yeah, it's not our strength. It's actually a huge weakness. But he sat on it. He sat on those findings for a long time before he actually published his book, because he didn't want it to be true.
That's awesome, because that's exactly the same thing that I forget the name of the scientist, but discovered a huge amount of fossils and everything. Related to the Cambrian explosion, and basically his fossils and everything supported the idea that the Cambrian explosion really was just a massive anomaly that shouldn't be according to Darwinian evolution. He basically sat on them. His fossils and everything stayed inside drawers for decades before they were finally uncovered, and people are like, "Oh,
what is yeah,
bigger issue even than we thought." Son of a.
So yeah, it's really that these people, they're people. These people are people.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can't escape that. And that's, again, I know I talk about it a lot, but I think at the core of the replicability crisis is the detachment of science from the objective truth of God or religion, however you want to say it. I think that yes, thank you. Interesting Superman poster, somebody commented. It's for it's Batman v Superman if nobody knows. But anyway, but yeah, these humans are humans, and you can't escape that, and that's why it's so important that we have this idea that there is an objective truth, and that we don't let these scientists override our common sense and what we can understand about what we can understand about the world that we live in. So it's that's the thing that that I think is the big takeaway from the whole replicability crisis, and that's what I'd like people to that's why I'd like more people to kind of wake up and realize that there's things going on here, and we as humans don't know a lot of what we think we know.
Well, exactly, and there's a lot of times what we think we understand. No, we just know that it works.
Right.
Like gravity is a perfect example. Yeah. We know that gravity works. We have a pretty good idea of how it works, but we don't have for the love of us, actually know why it works. Yeah. We don't have the slightest idea really what it is that connects the Earth to the moon and makes the moon move around. Yeah, we say gravity, but what is gravity? We don't actually know. We have not found gravitic lines of force the way there are magnetic lines of force. We haven't found that. There are gravitational waves. We have proven that. That was something predicted by Einstein, and we have proven it. That is the thing, but that's not the same thing that we're talking about.
Right.
There was a theory for a while that there was another subatomic particle that had yet to be discovered called a graviton. I don't think that we're still working on that. It seems like that's fallen out of favor.
Yeah, I think that's from what I understand. I don't think the graviton is kind of a thing that's people are looking at anymore.
Yeah, I think it might be the the graviton might be to physics what limbo is to Catholic theology. For a while people were pretty sure it was true, but couldn't quite sign off on it. And they were like, maybe not.
Yeah.
I like making my religious analogies because that's a subject that I know fairly well. I know the sciences a little bit, since astronomy was actually my first love way back in the day. First thing I ever loved was astronomy. I started reading about that. And I was like, this is amazing. And it still is. It still is very cool, but I'm not quite as in love anymore.
Right. Yeah. Well, everything gets tempered as you think you're like, oh, well, don't have the time to devote to that what I used to. So
exactly. One only has so much time in the day. Madness. Actually, when I was saying that, I did think of Graviton, the villain from Marvel Comics. Nice. I actually was thinking about that. But in any case, we are actually at an hour. So real quick though, to wrap things up, what do you think this means? What's the big takeaway that we should take away from this?
Well, I've kind of been repeating it a little bit throughout, but I think the big takeaway from the replicability crisis is that we have to understand that the science is produced by people. There's a difference between the profession of a scientist and the scientific method and the results from what you get from the scientific method. Mm-hmm. These are distinct things, and whenever you institute humans in an equation, it's always going to have certain biases and effects, and then we have to understand that, and we have to ground science in objective truth so that it can mean something. Because if it's not, then it just doesn't mean anything.
Pretty much. And we have to be careful with how we go about doing that, and not necessarily accept everything that any scientist says as the truth. Treat it like the internet. Okay.
Exactly.
It's just because it comes from somebody wearing a white lab coat doesn't make it so. Be at least as skeptical of science as you are of religion, people. I'm serious.
Yep.
I'm serious because people tend to think that they have to blindly accept all of one or the other. It is not so.
Very true.
And also I just want to finish. I hope no one comes away from this thinking that we are in any way denigrating science in general. Certainly not. Huge fan of the stuff. Love it.
Huge fan.
Love it. After all, Jake is currently he's a nuclear operator in the Navy.
Indeed.
He works with the support systems for nuclear reactors. Okay, and even since I know what Jake does, because I also was a Navy nuke back in the day. I know what Jake does. He actually controls the reactor. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. In addition to the various philosophy, history, and theology books you can find on my shelves. You can also find some science books, including a few physics books. Okay, so and again, as we hinted before, you go through a lot of the scientific achievements of the past. Many of them were done by religious people. Many Catholics, but I want to give the Protestants their due too. Kepler was a Protestant, so.
Yep.
And many others as well, obviously. But on that note, next week is just going to be me. It may not be at the regular time. At least it may just be me. I don't know. I might pull a rabbit out of my hat, but no promises. Okay, people. But it may not be at the regular time. It may be at kind of a surprise time because I'm going to be in DC for the March for Life this coming Friday. And I'll still be there on Saturday. So at the very least, it'll be different. I'll be in a different location, just going from my surface. So you'll get to see the hotel room that I'm staying in probably. And hopefully my kids will be quiet. No promises. No promises. But again, I might pull a little rabbit out of my hat. We'll see. It could be interesting. After that, I've got Jeff back from the Gatekeepers podcast. I think we're going to be discussing rights to self-defense. And then after that, we're going to have Paige Rogers back. And we're going to be talking about some stuff going on in the Anglican world. So we'll be doing a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of religion, and maybe some actual theology thrown in there. And then after that, I haven't figured it out yet, but I'll let you know. Okay. So until next week, when you see me broadcasting from DC, keep fighting the good fight.